A greedy billionaire evicts a struggling family. The next day, his bank accounts are completely wiped out. In the heart of Oakville, a bustling city where dreams were built and broken, stood the imposing Carver Tower. Its sleek glass facade reflected the ambitions of its owner, Thomas Carver, a billionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and insatiable greed. Thomas sat in his penthouse office, his eyes fixed on the sprawling cityscape below. He reveled in the power he wielded, the lives he controlled with a mere flick of his wrist. His latest project, a lavish development that would redefine luxury living, required the acquisition of a small, dilapidated building on the outskirts of town. Little did Thomas know that the building was home to the Masons, a struggling family of four. Evelyn Mason, the family's matriarch, had poured her heart and soul into making the modest dwelling a sanctuary for her loved ones. Her son, Daniel, worked tirelessly to support the family while nurturing a quiet determination to uncover the truth behind Thomas Carver's empire. As the sun set over Oakville, casting long shadows across the city streets, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Masons' doorstep. The man introduced himself as Mr. Jameson, a representative of Carver Enterprises. With a cold smile and an air of superiority, he handed Evelyn an eviction notice, giving the family a mere 30 days to vacate their home. Evelyn's world crumbled around her as she realized the gravity of their situation. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the notice, the weight of uncertainty and despair threatening to overwhelm her. Daniel, his eyes burning with a quiet rage, vowed to find a way to protect his family and bring Thomas Carver to justice. News of the Masons' eviction spread like wildfire through the close-knit community of Oakville's outer district. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, their faces etched with concern and anger. They had all witnessed Thomas Carver's ruthless business practices, but never had they hit so close to home. Among the crowd was Laura Chen, a local journalist who had been following Thomas Carver's rise to power with a critical eye. She approached Daniel, her curiosity piqued by the young man's determined demeanor. As they spoke, Laura sensed there was more to the story than met the eye. Daniel confided in Laura, sharing his suspicions about Thomas Carver's underhanded dealings. He had been quietly gathering evidence, piecing together a puzzle that pointed to a web of corruption and exploitation. Laura, intrigued by Daniel's findings, offered to help him uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Evelyn found solace in the support of her neighbors. They rallied around her, offering words of encouragement and practical assistance. Among them was Mrs. Olson, an elderly widow who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. She took Evelyn under her wing, sharing stories of resilience and the power of community in the face of adversity. As the days ticked by, Daniel and Laura worked tirelessly to build a case against Thomas Carver. They delved into public records, interviewed former employees, and followed a trail of breadcrumbs that led them to a startling discovery. Thomas Carver's mentor, a man named Victor Stanton, had once been a respected figure in the business world until he had a change of heart and disappeared from the public eye. Daniel's search for Victor Stanton led him to a secluded cabin nestled in the mountains, far from the bustling city of Oakville. As he approached the rustic dwelling, he felt a mix of apprehension and hope. If anyone could help him bring Thomas Carver to justice, it was the man who had once been his mentor. Victor Stanton greeted Daniel with a warm smile and a knowing look in his eyes. He had been expecting the young man's arrival, having followed Thomas Carver's exploits from afar. Over a cup of hot coffee, Victor shared his story, revealing the moment that had forever changed his perspective on power and wealth. Years ago, Victor had been on the same path as Thomas Carver, consumed by greed and the pursuit of success at any cost. It wasn't until he witnessed the devastating impact of his actions on a small town that he realized the error of his ways. He had walked away from his empire, dedicating his life to helping others and atoning for his past mistakes. Victor saw in Daniel a kindred spirit, a young man driven by a desire for justice and compassion. He agreed to help Daniel in his fight against Thomas Carver, offering his knowledge and resources. Together, they began to craft a plan that would expose Thomas Carver's true nature and bring about his downfall. Back in Oakville, Evelyn and the community continued to support one another in the face of adversity. They organized peaceful protests, calling attention to Thomas Carver's unethical business practices. Mrs. Olson and the other neighbors took turns cooking meals and offering childcare for the Mason family, ensuring that they never felt alone in their struggle. As the 30-day eviction deadline drew near, Daniel and Victor put their plan into motion. They leaked documents to the press, exposing Thomas Carver's involvement in shady deals and illegal activities. The story made headlines, sparking public outrage and prompting an investigation by the authorities. Thomas Carver sat in his office, his face contorted with rage as he watched the news reports of his unraveling empire. He pounded his fist on the desk, refusing to accept defeat. In his mind, he was untouchable, his wealth and power a shield against any consequence. Desperate to maintain control, Thomas resorted to intimidation tactics, threatening those who dared to speak out against him. He hired a team of lawyers to bury the evidence and discredit his accusers. But even as he fought tooth and nail, he could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. Daniel and Victor's plan had set in motion a chain of events that could not be stopped. The authorities raided Thomas Carver's offices, seizing documents and computers that held damning evidence of his misdeeds. Former employees came forward, sharing stories of exploitation and abuse that painted a grim picture of the man behind the empire. In the midst of the chaos, Daniel received an unexpected visitor at the Masons' home. It was Laura, the journalist who had helped him uncover the truth. She brought with her a message from Victor Stanton, a final piece of the puzzle that would seal Thomas Carver's fate. Victor had discovered that Thomas Carver's wealth was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. He had been siphoning funds from his investors, funneling the money into offshore accounts and fraudulent schemes. With this information in hand, Daniel and Laura knew they had the power to bring Thomas Carver to his knees. As the news of Thomas Carver's crimes spread, the community of Oakville rallied behind the Mason family. They gathered in the streets, their voices raised in a collective call for justice. Evelyn stood tall among them, her eyes shining with a newfound strength and determination. In the weeks that followed, Thomas Carver's empire crumbled like a house of cards. His assets were frozen, his property seized, and his reputation lay in tatters. The once untouchable billionaire found himself facing a barrage of legal charges, each one more damning than the last. As the dust settled, the community of Oakville began to heal. The Mason family, no longer faced with the threat of eviction, found solace in the support of their neighbors. Daniel, hailed as a hero for his role in bringing Thomas Carver to justice, turned his attention to helping others who had suffered under the billionaire's greed. Together with Victor Stanton and Laura Chen, Daniel established a nonprofit organization dedicated to fighting corruption and promoting economic justice. They worked tirelessly to expose wrongdoing, support victims, and advocate for change. The seeds of their efforts took root, inspiring a new generation of activists and changemakers. Evelyn, her spirit renewed by the outpouring of love and support from her community, became a beacon of hope for others facing hardship. She opened her home to those in need, offering a listening ear and a warm meal to anyone who crossed her threshold. Her acts of kindness, small yet profound, rippled outward, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. As the seasons changed, the community of Oakville blossomed. The once dilapidated building that had been the Masons' home was transformed into a vibrant community center, a hub of activity and connection. Gardens sprang up in vacant lots, tended by the hands of neighbors who had become family. A year had passed since the fall of Thomas Carver, and the community of Oakville had undergone a remarkable transformation. The scars left by greed and exploitation had begun to heal, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and purpose. Daniel, now a respected figure in the fight for economic justice, found himself grappling with the weight of his newfound responsibilities. He traveled the country, speaking at conferences and meetings, sharing his story and the lessons he had learned. But even as he inspired others, he felt a growing sense of unease, a nagging feeling that he was losing touch with the very people he sought to help. One evening, as he sat in his office, buried in paperwork and emails, a knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. It was Mrs. Olson, the elderly widow who had been a pillar of strength for the Mason family during their darkest days. She smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Daniel, my boy," she said, "I think it's time you took a break. The community center is hosting a potluck dinner tonight, and I won't take no for an answer." Daniel hesitated, glancing at the stack of files on his desk. But the lure of a home-cooked meal and the company of his neighbors proved too strong to resist. He followed Mrs. Olson to the community center, where he was greeted by a sea of familiar faces. As he sat at the long table, surrounded by laughter and the aroma of delicious food, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He listened to the stories of his neighbors, their triumphs and struggles, and realized that this was what truly mattered. The fight for justice was not won in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the hearts and minds of the people he loved. Across town, in a small, unassuming office, Laura Chen sat at her desk, poring over a stack of documents. Her investigation into Thomas Carver's empire had opened a Pandora's box of corruption, revealing a network of politicians and businessmen who had profited from his schemes. As she delved deeper into the web of deceit, Laura found herself facing a new set of challenges. Threats and intimidation tactics began to surface, aimed at silencing her and derailing her investigation. She knew she was on the right track, but the road ahead was fraught with danger. One evening, as Laura worked late into the night, a mysterious package arrived at her office. Inside, she found a thumb drive and a cryptic note: "The truth will set you free." With trembling hands, she plugged the drive into her computer, her heart racing as she watched the files load onto the screen. What she discovered left her breathless. The documents revealed a conspiracy that reached the highest echelons of power, implicating officials at every level of government. The evidence was damning, but Laura knew that bringing it to light would put her life in jeopardy. She reached out to Daniel and Victor, the only people she trusted with the information. Together, they devised a plan to expose the truth while ensuring Laura's safety. They worked in secret, meeting in hidden locations and communicating through encrypted channels. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Laura felt a growing sense of purpose. She knew that the road ahead would be long and perilous, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With Daniel and Victor by her side, she knew that the truth would prevail, no matter the cost. Back in Oakville, Evelyn Mason stood in the center of the community garden, her hands caked with soil and her face beaming with pride. The once barren plot of land had been transformed into a lush oasis, bursting with vibrant flowers, fragrant herbs, and ripe vegetables. For Evelyn, the garden was more than just a hobby, it was a symbol of the community's resilience and the power of collective action. Each plant had been tended by the hands of her neighbors, each seed a testament to their determination to create something beautiful in the face of adversity. As she worked alongside Mrs. Olson and the other volunteers, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought of the hardships they had endured, the tears they had shed, and the laughter they had shared. Through it all, the community had been their anchor, a source of strength and comfort in the darkest of times. Evelyn's reverie was interrupted by the sound of excited chatter. A group of children, led by Daniel's younger sister, Sarah, had arrived at the garden, eager to learn about the plants and the creatures that called it home. Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with joy as she watched the little ones explore the garden with wide-eyed wonder. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Evelyn gathered the children around her. She told them stories of the community's struggles and triumphs, of the power of kindness and the importance of standing up for what was right. The children listened, rapt with attention, their young minds absorbing the lessons that would shape their futures. In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the love of her neighbors, Evelyn knew that the seeds they had planted would continue to grow, long after she was gone. The community of Oakville had been through the fire, but they had emerged stronger, united by a bond that could never be broken. As Daniel, Laura, and Victor worked to expose the corruption that had taken root in the highest levels of power, they found themselves facing a new set of challenges. The forces arrayed against them were formidable, with deep pockets and far-reaching influence. But they refused to be intimidated. They gathered evidence, built alliances, and worked tirelessly to bring the truth to light. They knew that the road ahead would be long and treacherous, but they were fueled by a sense of purpose that could not be extinguished. One evening, as they sat hunched over a table, poring over documents and strategizing their next move, a breakthrough occurred. A whistleblower from within the corrupt network had come forward, offering to testify and provide damning evidence of the conspiracy. The trio knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for. They worked around the clock, preparing for the impending storm. They reached out to trusted journalists and activists, building a coalition of support that would help them weather the backlash that was sure to come. As the day of the whistleblower's testimony approached, tensions ran high. The corrupt officials and businessmen who had profited from Thomas Carver's schemes were desperate to maintain their grip on power. They unleashed a barrage of threats and smear campaigns, hoping to discredit the whistleblower and derail the investigation. But Daniel, Laura, and Victor stood firm. They had come too far to back down now. They knew that the truth was on their side, and that the power of the people would ultimately prevail. As they stepped into the courtroom, their hearts racing with anticipation, they knew that the coming days would be the most important of their lives. The future of Oakville, and indeed the entire nation, hung in the balance. Back in Oakville, the community center had become a hub of activity and support. Volunteers from all walks of life came together to offer their skills and resources, creating a network of mutual aid that stretched across the city. Evelyn, Mrs. Olson, and the other leaders of the community worked tirelessly to ensure that no one was left behind. They organized food drives, job training programs, and mental health support groups, providing a lifeline to those who had been hit hardest by the economic fallout of Thomas Carver's crimes. As the days turned into weeks, the community of Oakville began to heal. The scars left by greed and exploitation would never fully fade, but a new sense of unity and purpose had taken hold. People looked out for one another, offering a helping hand to their neighbors in need. One sunny afternoon, as Evelyn sat on the porch of the community center, watching the children play in the garden, she received a call from Daniel. His voice was filled with excitement and relief as he shared the news. The whistleblower's testimony had been a resounding success. The evidence presented had been undeniable, exposing the depths of corruption and greed that had infiltrated the halls of power. The public outcry was swift and fierce. Citizens took to the streets, demanding accountability and change. The media, once complicit in Thomas Carver's schemes, now turned their attention to the corrupt officials and businessmen who had enabled his crimes. In the face of overwhelming pressure, the dominoes began to fall. Arrests were made, resignations tendered, and a new era of transparency and integrity began to take hold. Daniel, Laura, and Victor found themselves at the center of a movement that was sweeping the nation, inspiring hope and catalyzing change. As Evelyn listened to Daniel's words, tears of joy streamed down her face. She thought of the long, difficult road they had traveled, the sacrifices they had made, and the unbreakable bonds they had forged. In that moment, she knew that all the pain and struggle had been worth it. They had not only saved their own community, but had lit a spark that would ignite the hearts and minds of people across the country. In the weeks that followed, Oakville underwent a remarkable transformation. The once struggling community was now a beacon of hope and resilience, a model for other cities to follow. The community center became a hub of innovation and collaboration, where people from all backgrounds came together to share ideas and build a brighter future. Daniel, his mission accomplished, returned home to Oakville, eager to be reunited with his family and friends. As he walked through the streets he had known since childhood, he marveled at the changes that had taken place. The air was filled with a new energy, a sense of possibility that had been absent for far too long. When he arrived at the community center, he was greeted by a sight that took his breath away. The garden, once a modest patch of green, had blossomed into a sprawling oasis, filled with vibrant colors and the laughter of children. At the center of it all stood Evelyn, her face radiant with pride and love. As Daniel embraced his mother, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be new challenges and obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that he was not alone. He had his family, his friends, and a community that had proven time and again that together they could weather any storm. As the months passed, Oakville continued to thrive. The seeds of change that had been planted in the wake of Thomas Carver's downfall had taken root, blossoming into a vibrant, inclusive community that celebrated diversity and upheld the values of compassion and justice. Daniel, Laura, and Victor continued their work, using their platform to advocate for systemic change and empower communities across the nation. They traveled far and wide, sharing their story and inspiring others to take up the fight against corruption and greed. But even as they worked to change the world, they never forgot their roots. They returned to Oakville often, drawing strength and inspiration from the community that had given them so much. They volunteered at the community center, mentored young activists, and worked alongside their neighbors to build a brighter future for all. Evelyn, now a respected elder in the community, watched with pride as her children and grandchildren carried on the legacy of resilience and compassion that had been passed down through generations. She knew that the road ahead would be long, that there would be setbacks and challenges along the way. But she also knew that as long as they had each other, as long as they held fast to the values that had guided them through the darkest of times, they would never lose hope. Years later, as the sun set over Oakville, casting a golden glow over the community center and the gardens that surrounded it, an old woman sat on a bench, her eyes closed in quiet contemplation. It was Evelyn, now in her twilight years, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the struggles and triumphs, the laughter and tears, the countless acts of kindness and courage that had shaped her life and the lives of those around her. She thought of Daniel, now a leader in the fight for justice, and of Laura and Victor, who had become like family to her. As the last rays of sunlight faded into the gathering dusk, Evelyn felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that her time was drawing to a close, but she also knew that her legacy would live on, carried forward by the generations that would come after her. With a smile on her face and love in her heart, Evelyn closed her eyes and let the warmth of the evening wash over her. She had lived a life of purpose and meaning, and she knew that, in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, the community of Oakville continued to thrive, a testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of love and compassion that had been forged in the face of adversity. And though the road ahead would be long and the challenges many, they knew that as long as they had each other, as long as they held fast to the values that had guided them through the darkest of times, there was nothing they could not overcome.